Hi, 7th graders. This is a study guide for preparing you for your test on Chapter 5, which is on operations with integers, that is positive and negative numbers. Remember that integers are all of the whole numbers, like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and their opposites, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, etc. A zero pair are a pair of numbers that add up to 0, so 5 plus negative 5 are considered to be a zero pair. There's also the definition of opposites. Two numbers that add up to 0 are considered to be opposites. So, the best way for you to do this, or a suggested way, would be, I'm just going to do a lot of problems that are similar to the ones that you're going to have in your test. If I present a problem, I would suggest you pause the video and try to solve it, and then watch the solution and see if you agree with what I show you. I'm sure you'll agree with the first one, 4 plus 3. When you add two positive numbers, you always get a positive answer. So 4 plus 3 would be 7. Now this is one you might want to pause. Let's just change the signs and make it negative 4 plus negative 3. You can go ahead and solve that or think about what the answer is. I'll remind you that we introduced this by showing counters, like 4 negatives. Negative 4 would be represented like this. Whoops. And then when you add 3 more negatives, we do this. If we get this kind of combination, that's a zero pair, that adds up to 0. We don't have that here. So we just count the results. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Negative 7. So when you add two negative numbers, you always get a negative answer. And you can just add their absolute values, that is how far they are from 0. Just forget the signs. Do 4 plus 3, but make sure you make it negative. Do not confuse that with the rule for multiplication, because when you multiply numbers that have the same sign, the result is positive. But when you add, and that's one of the tricky things about this chapter, the rules are different for addition and for subtraction, and then multiplication and division, the rules are very similar. So what happens if you're doing a negative plus a positive? Well, it depends which one is farther from 0. If we did this with counters, we had 4 negatives and 3 positives. That's a 0 pair, 0 pair, 0 pair, and the result is negative 1. And we learned that, you can have a problem, let's do it, you would want to do counters for 200, negative 200 plus 51. But you'll figure out, I've got more negatives, so the answer would be negative. And then you'd ask how many more, and you would do 200 minus 51, and the result would be 149. But that's 149 negatives. So that's how you would do an addition problem. Those are all examples of addition. So if you know addition, you can do subtraction. Because subtraction, we use the keep, change, change rule. And I know in class sometimes we talked about that rule and we got confused. When do you use it? Do you use it for multiplication and division? Do you use it for addition? You only use the keep, change, change for subtraction. So if I have 6 minus negative 8, and I'll let you try to figure out what that is. You could stop your video, figure it out, but then you keep the first number and you change the sign of the operation and change the sign of the number. So this would be positive 14. If it was negative 6 minus a positive 8, keep, change, change. 6 negatives and 8 more negatives makes negative 14. So that's the quick review of subtraction. Multiplication and division have the same pretty simple rule. If the signs are the same, the result is positive. If the signs are different, the result is negative. So if I have negative 8 times negative 2, the signs are the same. The answer would be positive 16. If it's negative 8 times positive 2, negative sign, positive sign, the signs are different, it's a negative answer. And the rule for division is exactly the same. When you do a division problem, if you have 20, let's say negative 20 divided by negative 4, you're combining two negatives, the quotient would be positive. If this would be a positive 4, the quotient is negative. So that's the quick review of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Then we're going to look at one-step equations like addition of numbers, say negative 7. So something plus negative 7, let's say equals 10. There's 3 steps to do in solving this. You copy the problem, which is going to be done, the equation, which is going to be done for you on your test. So you don't have to worry about step 1. Step 2, look at what's happening to the variable and do the opposite. to both sides. So the property of equality, the properties of equality say you can add, subtract the same number to both sides of the equation, or you can multiply everything on one side and everything on the other side by the same number, and it's still a true equation. So what do we want to do? Our goal is to get the letter m, the variable m, all by itself on one side, either the left side or the right side. That's called isolating the variable, and we can figure out a strategy by just looking at it and saying, do the opposite of add -7. Well, there are two opposites of adding -7. You can take your choice. You can either subtract -7, that would be one way, or you can add a +7. And if you think about what's going to be easier over here, it's probably adding +7. So if you do add +7, here's your zero pair, m plus 0 on the left, which would be m. Whatever you do to the left side, you have to do to the right side, and we get 17. And your final step, which can be a mental approach, say m is 17, is it true that 17 plus -7 is 10? And for the work that you're going to be doing on your test, the numbers are not going to be really difficult to work with. They're going to be large numbers. It's more about the process. So you would probably be able to do that check within your head, mental work. What if we had a number minus -4 equals -21? I'm choosing this one because you know you're going to do some, probably know you're going to do something with the 4 and the 21, but there's negatives, there's subtractions. So your intuition, or you just like the way I would look at it, and I think I know what the answer is, but you might be wrong about that. So you need to approach it fairly technically. One of the first things you could do here is keep, change, and makes this a much simpler problem. You can keep A, change that to addition, change that to +4. So then it's pretty similar to the one we just did. You can either do the opposite of, we need to get this to be a 0, so you can either subtract +4, which makes sense, or you can add -4, which also makes sense. And if you look at what's going to happen over here, you might want to add -4. Having said that, I'm going to go ahead and subtract +4 and see what happens. Okay, this is going to be a 0 pair right here. That's A. So what happens over here when I want to subtract 4 from -21? It's like this problem. And I go keep, change. Okay, remember when I said over here we could either subtract 4 or we could add -4? And basically, when we do the subtraction, we're going to change it to add -4. And that would be -25, which is an answer that makes sense. So that's the sample problems for a one-step addition and subtraction equations. Then one or two examples about multiplication and division. We have -6 multiplied by a number, and we know that's 72. We can do the opposite of multiplying by -6, which would be to divide by -6. I really like this as a choice for a division symbol. This any number whenever you divide a number by itself, you get 1. So this is 1. It's 1a. So we've isolated the variable. 6 goes into 72 12 times, but it's a positive divided by a negative, so it's -12. So that's an example of how you can undo multiplication. Undoing division, if we have b divided by -4 equals 28. I'm going to say you might be tempted to guess 7 or something to do with 7, in which case you would be really wrong. So follow the process. I like to see this rewritten this way, with the bar for division. You don't have to, but it makes it simpler. So what's the opposite of dividing by -4, which would be? Multiply by -4. So we cancel here. If you take b and divide by 4, take that result, multiply by, -4. Dividing number by -4, multiply the result by -4, you come right back to what that is, b. And this would be 4 times 28, -4 times, I think it's 112, -112. See, 4 25s is 100, and then 4 3s is 12, so that would be -112. -112 divided by -4 is +28. So that's just one example of each of those multiplication and division equations. then I'm going to go a very complex compared to what you're going to be asked to do, simplifying exercise. But when you simplify, remember you do parentheses or grouping symbols first. You've got a whole bunch of things to do in an expression. How are you going to decide what you do first? And order of operations is really significant. Then powers or exponents. Then multiplication and division. I should say multiplication or division. Left to right. If division comes first, if you got rid of all the parentheses and powers, if division comes first in the problem, you do division first. Because we don't put them on separate lines. We don't say 1 parentheses, 2 powers, 3 multiplication, 4 division. It's multiplication or division. Likewise, if you've done all this other stuff, the only thing you have left is addition and subtraction. And you do whichever comes first in your problem. Okay, so let's see how this applies to negative 5 to the second power minus 16 divided by 2 times 5 plus 3. There's lots of traps in this problem. If you don't follow the order of operations, you won't get it right. So we see there something like parentheses, but really all this is showing is that we want to take negative 5 and multiply it by itself 2 times. That's different than this. This is the opposite of 5 to the second power. 5 to the second power is 25. This would be equal to negative 25. But that's not what this is. That's negative 5 times negative 5. So follow your rules. What happens when you multiply 2 negatives together? What's this going to become? What's the value of negative 5 in the second power? I hope you're thinking positive 25, because that's what it is. Now, I'm going to go ahead and combine a couple steps here, but I'm certainly not going to do any subtraction or addition, because that's the last thing we do. If I start doing subtraction or addition right now, I can predict wrong answer. Minus. Now we've got a division and a multiplication, so that's going to have to be done in that order. 16 divided by 2 is 8. It might be good for me just to write that down. I mean, you could, probably mentally could do the 8 times 5 in your head, because that's what's going to happen next. You've got a subtraction, a multiplication, and an addition. These things happen last. Make sure you do the multiplication before you do 25 minus 8, or before you do 5 plus 3. You have to do 8 times 5, which is 40. 25 minus 40 plus 3. Now I'm finally down to the last step. There's nothing left here except for subtraction and addition. And I really like to change all subtraction to add the opposite. Keep, change, change. I like the way that runs together. Now I can, because everything is addition, I can use the commutative property and change the order of these 3 add-ins. And I can do 25 plus 3 first, which is 28, plus negative 40. 40 negatives and 28 positives, the result is 12 negatives. If I would suggest if you didn't pause the video and try to work this, and you go back, copy it down, don't look at the answer and try to work down through it until you are able to successfully simplify it to be negative 12. There's only one more thing that I want to show you, and only because there's a specific kind of a problem in your test that I want you to be ready for. And it involves income and expense in the business. Income is how much you earn, and expense is what you spend in order to earn that money. And sometimes you spend more than you make. That's unfortunate, but it happens. It often happens if you're doing a business and you're in your first couple of years, you might have to make a lot of investments in the beginning, and then you make some money, but not enough to cover all your expense. Suppose you started a company, and the first year you made $800, but you had to spend $900 in order to get it going. So that's year 1. In year 2, you actually make what you spent, which is a good thing. Let's just say, for example, it's $1,500 that you make, and you still had to spend $900. Okay, so the kind of questions we could ask is, in what years did you make a profit? In what year did you show a loss? Well, you made a profit in year 2. You had a loss in year 1. We could say, how much did you, what was your loss in year 1? And you can express it, you can say a $100 loss, or you can say the net amount, when you compare expense and income, the net was negative $100. The difference between the sum of the two numbers, if you consider this a negative number, expense being negative and income being positive, you could express year one as 800 plus negative 100 plus negative 900, which would be negative 100. Another question that could be asked is, over the first 2 years, did this business have a profit or did they have a loss? And there's two ways that you can successfully solve that problem. You can find out the total of the separate years, and you can say year one, it would be a negative $100 because we lost $100. Year two would be a positive 600 because the difference between 1,500 and 900 is 600. And then the net would be the two numbers added together, or a $500 profit overall. So in both years, the profit turned out to be $500. Another way that you could say to do that problem would be to say my total income for the 2 years was $800 plus $1,500, or $2,300. That's my net income, and my net losses were 900 plus negative 900, negative 900 plus negative $900, or negative 1,800. And when you combine these two numbers with addition, you also get $500. So two ways to do the same problem, but I want you to be familiar. I think your chart's going to have more grids in it. So this is just not the first time you see something like this. Not seeing it for the first time in your test. So this is considered a positive number, and then expenses are a negative number. So do some sample problems, and that's the best way for you to prepare for your test. Good luck.